Now, these have been a bunch of scary scenarios over the course of the last two slides. These are all of the dangers and pitfalls that are out there for an IT services company. And the FAR doesn't really require you to do much beyond have general liability and have workers' comp. Now, luckily, there are safety nets available for you on all of these other things. Here we are on the next slide where it says insurance protection. Now, general liability, that's what we just talked about. That is something that is out there to protect the public, the slip and falls, the fires, the accidents, the roof getting blown off in a storm, and hitting somebody. These are the things that protect the public. And it's required, and you're all going to have that. And workers' comp, well, that protects your employees. And the government requires you to have that because the government's looking out for all your employees. Now, the next one is property. That's not required. But most of us understand the idea of property insurance, just like you have homeowners insurance. If there is a fire, if there is damage, if the roof does blow off and the rain gets in, property insurance protects your company property. It lets you get new desks and new filing cabinets, new computers, new cars. Property is a pretty easy one. Now, where it begins to get interesting is the next one, professional liability. That is your safety net. That is your malpractice insurance for when something gets screwed up, whether by the actions of one of your employees, whether by the actions of a subcontractor or a 1099, whether it's just incredibly bad luck, but somehow you are unable to complete your job, or you do the job and something goes horribly, horribly wrong that opens you to litigation, either from a prime or from the government itself. Professional liability is your safety net. It protects you from the errors and omissions that can occur. It will defend you in court, and they can provide the damages if necessary.
Yeah, let me jump in for 1 second. The interesting thing that you'll see on professional liability lawsuits is it's not necessarily the work that you don't do right or the work that you fail to do, but it can also be the assumption on the part of the government client or the prime contractor of your failure to do the work or do the work right. There's certainly going to be situations where you don't do something or don't do something right, or putting it another way, doing something wrong. But there'll also be situations where there'll be a dispute, where the prime or the client will say, you didn't do this right. Now, you may say, of course I did this right. I did everything I was supposed to do. I looked at my contract. I was directed by a contracts officer. I was directed by a program manager. I was directed by government or prime on site. I did what I was supposed to do. And the answer you get is, well, no, you didn't. So it's not necessarily being sued for or being or indemnifying against something that you did wrong or didn't do, but it's also defending against claims that, assumptions that, assertions that you did something wrong. And that's where the professional liability comes in, and where that insurance is so important, is because it's not necessarily you did something wrong or you forgot to do something, but assumptions on the part of the government client or the prime contractor that you did something wrong, and you end up in litigation. And what I always like to say through litigation, it's wonderful if you win, but spending $300,000 to prove you're right just makes lawyers wealthy, which I don't think many lawyers have issues with. But if you have insurance that provides assistance with that, you'll also win, and you won't take the $300,000 out of your pocket to prove that you're right. Thanks, Andrew.
No problem, Gary. Thank you. Now, the next three are also just additional safety nets for you. EPLI, Employment Practices Liability Insurance. That protects you against claims by disgruntled employees or third parties based on employee acts. That is the wrongful termination suit that you see. That is the I was fired because I am, and then fill in the blank. Those can be extremely expensive. Even if you're in the absolute right and you have a file 3 inches thick of everything that employee screwed up on, they can still sue you, and it'll be expensive. As Gary just said, you shouldn't have to spend the $300,000 out of pocket to defend against that. That's what employment practices liability can provide for you. Directors and officers is very much the same thing. It protects the owners, the directors, and the officers and their personal assets. from claims by third parties. Government, they couldn't care less if you go out of business because there's a zillion other contractors waiting in line for the government's money. But this is your way to provide a safety net and to defend yourself from claims that are made against you. Finally, umbrella coverage. That is the above and beyond the policy limits. You have a catastrophic accident with your general liability, and someone is paralyzed or killed, and they sue you for more than $1 million of your policy. Well, that's where your umbrella kicks in and can provide additional coverage, additional damages, and potentially save you from going out of business because of a single lawsuit. Now, I'm just going to pass it back to Gary, and then we're going to conclude pretty quickly. So, Gary, if you would.
Yeah, one thing I wanted, and thank you, Andrew, one thing I wanted to add here was the government has a army of lawyers, I hate to put it any other way, but an army of lawyers that can file claims, that can bring lawsuits, that can deal with discovery issues and all the way through litigation to judgment, and it doesn't cost the government anything other than what we pay in taxes. Personal injury lawyers, lawyers that handle employee claims, and other lawyers in that category will typically take on the claims of a disgruntled employee or a hurt individual on a contingency basis where they only get paid if they win. Unfortunately, you don't have the luxury, and most contractors don't have the luxury of having an army of lawyers on staff, nor do they have the luxury of having their claims defended on a contingency basis, as that wouldn't make sense. So if you have to deal with a professional liability claim, if you have to deal with an EPLI claim, if you have to deal with a directors and officers claim, you are taking the money out of your pocket to defend those claims against lawyers on contingency and the government's army of lawyers. And I can tell you these claims can go and run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars that without having the insurance protection to not only pay the claim, but also to defend against the claim, you could bankrupt your company just to prove that you're right. Thanks, Andrew. I just wanted to add that in.
Sure. So, in conclusion, let's go to the last slide here, or our next slide. In order for you to avoid any type of catastrophic loss, you have to pay attention to a number of things. First, you've got to pay attention to the specific insurance requirements and contract terms that Gary went through that create vulnerabilities, that create a situation where you could be in trouble, and then get that supplemental insurance, get that safety net that will protect you better. Next up, talk to trained insurance professionals that can review your contracts and work them through with you. We do that automatically at GovTech, but always ask your insurance agent to go through the contract with you and point out these hold harmless agreements, point out these indemnification provisions, and explain what type of coverage would be best suited to your needs. Our next point, failure to obtain the required insurance can provide prime contractors with insurance certificates can lead to termination. This is the big hammer. If you do not have the insurance that is required by the FAR, by any of the flow downs, by any of the requirements that the prime set, your contract can be summarily terminated. You could be blackballed. You could never work in this town again. You have to make sure that you are properly covered and that information via certificates of insurance is sent up the ladder. And finally, failure to obtain supplemental insurance, things like your professional liability, your employment practices, your directors and officers, that can just lead to you losing your company. A catastrophic loss could just take everything out of your pocket. It can even extend into some of your personal assets these days, and that is the last thing that anybody wants, especially when on the front end, insurance is a relatively good investment to protect yourself at a relatively low cost. So, I hope that this has been helpful. All of us here at GovTech look forward to answering any questions that you may have. Our information is on the last slide here, and we can open this up if anybody has any questions, or if we were just that incredible presenters that no one has any questions. Again, we'd like to thank everyone for the time.
We do have questions coming in, Andrew and Gary. Thank you very much. You've given us a wealth of information, and I know that you'll be hearing from folks whether they're listening to this live or as a recording, because this is one area that if they're not well prepared, it can be an expensive oversight. I'd like to go into some of those questions now, and then if you, between the two of you, could decide who would be the best one to answer. The first comes in from Nick. Are there any suggestions for very small businesses in regards to insurance that fits our needs the best without having a high cost?
Well, this is Andrew here. I'd like to answer that one for you, Nick. The trick with finding insurance that is specific to your company is finding a good agent who is willing to sit down and study your individual situation with you. Your company is as individual as your fingerprint, and you've got to have somebody who's willing to really take the time to learn and understand your company, come out and meet with you, interact with you, and ask you the questions you don't even realize you need to be asked, so they can develop a plan that best covers your situation and your potential liabilities.
And from the next one is from a government contractor, and this is from Lisa. She asks, if we are working on a client site at a government location, won't their insurance cover the employees?
The answer, and this is Gary, the answer to that typically is there will be insurance on site, but based on the contracts the prime was required to sign and the provisions that will flow down to you as a sub, the government will typically look to you to, again, hold them harmless and indemnify them against any claim that is made by an invitee guest of yours or an employee of yours. So although there will be insurance, obviously, on a government site, because of the contract you signed as a sub or as a prime, they will look to you to hold them harmless against any loss or payment. I think Andrew has something to add to that.
And, for example, in an employment practice situation, if there's a case of harassment or something like that by one of your employees, even if they're on site, the on-site folks will certainly not cover the actions of your employees in harassing another staff member, in harassing a client, something along that line. So you've got to always be looking at how can your company protect the actions of your folks.
Excellent point. Thank you very much. And we have another one that has come in from Anton. He asks, is the fee or cost involved with this insurance allowed to be billed to the federal customer?
Well, typically when you're putting together, this is Gary speaking, typically when you're putting together a GSA schedule or when you're putting together a billing schedule for the government and you're creating billing categories for your employees, the government will allow you, obviously, to include in that billing rate the burdened employee or the employee's salary plus tax plus any benefits. And then on top of that, you're going to build in your business general administrative cost or expense and create a percentage of that burden rate to each employee. And then on top of that, you'll put profit. So what most companies will do is, as insurance as part of the general and administrative expense of the company, they'll build that insurance into the general and administrative expense of the company and then, of course, attribute a percentage of that to each employee and then build that into the billing rate of each employee when they come up with a billing schedule.
Okay, very good. So, bottom line, it's best to have expert advice on each individual situation, and that's where your firms can come in and help the contractor understand exactly what the requirements are and what would keep them safest in performing the work.
Absolutely, because just like you wouldn't go see a plumber for a hole in your roof, you don't want to go see the State Farm guy from whom you get your auto insurance to cover your specialized business insurance. They probably do a great job at their job, and they've probably covered your auto well for years. But you want to take the time to talk to a group who understands the ins and outs of federal contracting and the specific needs of the government IT sector.
Well, that just plays directly into the next question that came in from Kathleen, which states, we have a generic insurance protection plan that has worked for us up until now very nicely. Do we need to get additional insurance against some of these contract situations that you've mentioned?
Well, again, the answer is, do you need to? By law, the answer is no. By law, you're required to have the insurance that flows down from the FAR and the prime contracts, which typically, again, includes the general liability insurance, the workers' compensation insurance, and then in some cases, airplane, auto, and possible umbrella coverages. That's what you have to have. If you do not, you could be terminated or debarred. So, and again, most debarment claims are fairly excessive when you're told 10 times to do something and you don't, but you can certainly lead to termination. So the question really becomes not do we need to have it, it becomes should we have it. And I'm hoping in the last 45 minutes we've explained that because of the contract clauses that you're required to sign, the contract clauses that are in the contracts you're required to sign, and the liability that's now been created by those contracts. And I can tell you, in my years of doing this, that liability is being extended to subcontractors more and more every year and every day. That if you do not have this type of insurance, I'm not saying you'll have a claim, but in the event you do have a claim, legal fees can reach into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, notwithstanding what you'll have to pay in the event you lose. And the cost of insurance is minimal compared to it. It's a good protection offer. And I think Andrew has something to add as well.
As your questioner asked, they've had a basic insurance policy that's worked great for them forever. Well, if it's worked great, odds are they haven't made a claim on it. And what you want to do is you want to make sure that you have an insurance policy like GovTech or like various other tech policies out there that are geared towards your industry. The policy that a barbershop would have, or a dry cleaner, or a restaurant, or a car repair shop, or a lawyer, or a doctor is going to be different than the one that a tech company should have. Each one of those has a policy that should be specific to them because everyone's needs are different. So having a basic catch-all, it could work. It might not. But what you want to do is you want to ask the folks who have provided you with that policy questions like the ones that are in this presentation and see how that policy stacks up, see how they answer those questions to make sure that the kind of protection you need in place is available.
And we have one final question to wrap up with, and this is from a company who appears to have a construction background, and it's from Eugene. And Eugene says, we are required to have extensive insurance coverage because we work in the construction industry. Does the federal government require additional coverage that we don't already usually have?
The answer to that is you would typically need to check to see which FAR provisions the government is flowing down to your contract. Almost every contract that you'll execute where you are a prime and directly contracting with the government, you'll see an attachment to that contract called FAR flowdowns. And it will have probably 8 or 10 or sometimes 20 pages of generic FAR provisions that are listed, and they'll check boxes. And those boxes that are checked will indicate what your insurance requirements are. So it's always helpful to have either an insurance professional or attorney or someone who you're comfortable with in those worlds to look at your FAR flowdowns and see what the provisions are. If the box isn't checked, you don't have the requirement. And, of course, what we're talking about in most of what Andrew covered today, you'll never see a box checked because what you'll see is contract clauses that require you to indemnify and hold harmless against acts that if you don't insure against, you're still liable for, but there won't be an insurance requirement for those boxes.
Very, very good. Thank you both so much. What I'd like to do now is introduce our host, Christine Demas. She is Director of the Fort Detrick Business Development Office. Christine, welcome. We're very glad you're here today.
Thank you, Gloria.
What can you tell us about this webinar series and past and upcoming sessions that you'd like the attendees to know about?
Well, of course, this has been a really great session. It's been very interesting. Insurance is one of those things that no one really pays too much mind to until it's too late. But we have some other great classes coming up. As useful as this one is, we have many more like that. We have 2 coming up in June. One is proposal writing, and another one is marketing to the federal government, how to fill your pipeline. And you can find out about and register for those classes by going to our website, www.fcbdo.com, and the classes are free. Just register. And as always, you can also find out anything you want to about the FCBDO and what we do for companies and how we can help just by visiting our website and learning more about us.
Thank you very, very much. And what I'd like to do is just remind everyone today that you can get in touch with the GovTech Risk Retention Group, Andrew Beardall and Gary Silverman. Their phone numbers and emails are on the screen right now, so you'll have a chance to jot them down and get in touch with them at your convenience. If you're thinking of bidding on government contracts, if you're already bidding and winning government contracts, you would be very well served to get in touch with these gentlemen, these experts in the insurance field, and ask them what would be the best protection for your company with the type of work that you provide, whether you're providing IT services or other services or products to the government. Andrew and Gary, thank you again for being here.
Thank you for having us.
We were very happy to do this.
Very good. We'll look forward to staying in touch, and we know that you'll open up your doors, phone lines, and emails for questions that will be coming in the future from the very active contracting group through the Fort Detrick Business Development Office. Christine, thank you again for hosting yet another very valuable webinar session of the Fort Detrick Business Development Office webinar series.
Thank you, Gloria, and you've done a great job as always, too.
And I'm your host, Gloria Berthold-Larkin from Target Gov. We'll look forward to helping everyone continue their business development and success in the federal contract market. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.